John's Gospel includes a number of stories like this that are way longer than in the Synoptic and the other Gospels. And they're longer, there's a lot more detail in them, we get characters, we get all kinds of different, and this story is not in any of the other Gospels, it simply appears in the Gospel of John. I just want to give you a little background to the story as we try to enter into it. It seems as if Jesus and his disciples were kind of taking a shortcut. In John's Gospel, they seem to commute back and forth between Galilee and Jerusalem for all these festivals. And at this point, they're kind of taking a shortcut through through Samaria. And we see they're getting to this well. It's about noon. It must be really hot. Jesus is tired. He sits down under a tree near this well. That was a gathering place. And he is sitting there. And this Samaritan woman comes out to draw water. We know that because she was coming out to draw water by herself at noon, she had a bad reputation in that town. She was seen as someone who, and we see later that she's probably promiscuous, maybe something of a harlot, but she is out there on her own because the other women aren't going to walk out there with her. And it's hard to say how far it was, but this would have been part of women's normal life, was morning and evening. Get your jar, you head out to the well, you fill it, and you carry it back. It's heavy. This is part of what would have gone on every day, and they would have had this community of Samaritan women who would have gone out together, but she was not welcome to walk with them. She was walking out there on her own in the heat of the day, which was not a really good time to walk out there. So she probably saw Jesus, saw that he was a Jew. She must have known that what Jewish men are supposed to do when they see a Samaritan woman is to spit, just to show their utter disgust. So what Jesus, as a good Jewish man, would have done, seeing her, would have gone, just to show that he was properly disgusted, a Samaritan woman. But instead, he says, give me a drink. You'll notice she says, how is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria? He's asking her for something that would be unclean. He could be tainted by this water given to him by such a filthy object as her. She is shocked. Look at that. And Jesus goes on to say, if you knew who was giving you this, you'd ask for water that lasted forever. And she obviously is cut by this. Wouldn't it be wonderful to not have to come out here all the time looking at this heavy thing? And they have this real interaction, don't they? I mean, she says, you don't even have a bucket. How are you going to give me water? She starts out really kind of on the literal side. And then he says, the water I have will become in a person a spring of water gushing up to eternal life. And then he says, go call your husband. And I can just imagine how she must have felt at that point. She must have thought, oh, blast it. I thought, here I am having this great conversation with this guy. He's going to find out who I am, what I'm really like. And so she says, well, don't have one. And he says, no, you don't. But you've had 5 and the one you're with now. So this sense of him kind of knowing about her must have scared the living daylights out of her. That sense of being known. And probably she had never been known before and loved. Many of us don't have that experience, do we, of being deeply known and fully loved. And yet, she's like, oh. And so I love this part where she says, gosh, I perceive you are a prophet. Let's have a theological discussion. She says, our ancestors worshipped here. It's the kind of a push into theological mode so that we're not getting too close to real life here. And Jesus says, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You'll worship the Father in spirit and truth. And so the woman says, well, I've heard about this Messiah. I know this Messiah is coming, and And Jesus says, and this is the first time he says this to anybody, and he says it to her, I am the Messiah. I am he. And then the disciples come back. And do you love this? Just then the disciples came. They were astonished that he was speaking with a woman. They were just like, what is he doing now? Talking to a woman? A Samaritan woman? What is this guy thinking? And then they say, well, here's some food. And he goes into his, I have food to eat, which you do not know. And they're like, did he already eat? Well, I didn't see any takeout around here. Where did he get food? And they're kind of taking it on this totally literal basis. And the woman leaves her water jar. I like that detail. Isn't that, all these times she comes out, she brings her water jar, she lugs it out, lugs it back, she leaves the jar there. That jar just doesn't even matter anymore. And goes back to the city and says, this guy told me all I've ever done. He hasn't told her all she's ever done. But she somehow has this feeling that this guy knows her thoroughly. And she becomes the one who goes back to the town and says, come and see this guy. He told me everything. And so the people come out with her and ask Jesus to stick around. So I asked you to, you each have one of these characters, and some are minor, some are major in this story. And I'd like you to consider what kind of stands out for you from the perspective of this character. What stands out to you from this story, from the point of view of Jesus, the Samaritan woman, the disciples, or the people of the village?
My character was a Samaritan, and I thought as I listened that at first I was like afraid. Here's this Jewish guy, what's he going to do to me? Here I am, I struggled out here at noon, I just want some water, and he's gonna do something. And then as it went on, she became kind of intrigued, and like, oh, who is this guy? And he's standing here and he's still talking to me. And then he tells her all about her life. But what really surprised me is that people followed her out. What happened there that they would believe this woman that was such a person of low end of the society in that village? How come they followed her?
Well, it's asking the people who
Oh, yeah, I know as a townsperson, that's one of the things that's always puzzled me about that story. So listening really carefully, what I was wondering is if this rejected woman would also not approach those people directly either, but she did. She approached them directly, and she was joyous, and she confessed that he knew all that she had done. She wasn't saying. Anyway, it was like all out in the open, and I suspect there was something in that openness that there's that free exchange or something about the openness that made them say, this is different.
Interesting, yeah. So the fact that she was joyous, but she was also true to who she was.
She would have been hiding these men, I'm sure, even though everybody knew about it. This is a small town, right? Everybody knows about it, but we're all pretending that we don't know about it. But this utterly open about it.
Yeah, interesting.
As the disciples, I'm the opposite. I'm completely upset with him, and nobody can say anything. Who's going to tell him? You can't do this guy.
Well, no, we're coming in at the end of the story, too. I mean, come on. All the action's over with, He got water, he ate, we just went all the way into town to get stuff.
Dorothy, you were going to say something.
I want to know how she knew he was a Jew. Was he dressed differently? Did he have an accent? How did she just know he's Jewish? Like if I look at David and I say, oh, he's an Episcopalian.
It's the crowd, see?
I think at that time, there would have been major cultural differences, just like, sometimes we see somebody here who's just come from the Twin Cities, and you look at them, and you see they're wearing a suit and tie, and they have a certain haircut, and you think, oh, okay, you're from the Twin Cities. It would have been something like that, and an accent as well, but she wouldn't have known that eventually. But, yeah, Dave.
Actually, I'm Jesus today.
He was Jewish, so
Your context was really helpful, because when I read it and I heard it, particularly in the beginning part, I got the sense, well, Jesus is really full of himself there.
that he says,
Hey lady, get me some water. and then the next thing, and if you're from Detroit or know Detroit politics, he says, do you know who the blank I am? And if you did, and the whole thing sounds so uncharacteristically Jesus, it just seems so out of context to me that I just kind of smile through the beginning part of it because I don't understand the context.
Well, yeah, it's interesting too, is I think, because Jesus also, it says he was tired, he'd come there and he was, thirsty and tired, and, and it's like, you're right, it does seem out of context if you just demand, I want water, please bring water. But he took that opportunity to become a teacher, and it was interesting that he was a teacher not only to the woman, but also to the disciples, because they were surprised in terms of what he was doing, and he said, well, listen, this is...
Yeah, he teaches all of them. And I think that's a great point, all that stuff about reapers and sowers, he's really saying different people do different things, but we get the word out. That's what he's teaching them.
The thing, the Samaritan woman also, the thing that hit me when you were going through it at the end was how here is another example of a woman being the disciple that's going out and telling the others about the Messiah, about Jesus, like we have Mary Magdalene after the resurrection.
I had the disciples that are very similar to what you're saying. I don't know how long the disciples were traveling with Jesus at this point, but they didn't get it. One short interaction that this woman at the well had with him, and it was like, oh, I get this. I understand. Why is it that she got it from such a short interaction, and yet the men that he's been traveling with and 24/7 with for however long?
Because they were men.
Yeah.
What is that?
You got it.
It's amazing to me.
Why is that?
Or why did he reveal himself to her? Maybe he hadn't revealed, if this was the first that he said, I am he. Couldn't those guys see it? I mean, actions speak louder than words.
Each one of the times he heals or forgives somebody that's really bad off, they really get it much more than people who are okay. And the fishermen, the tax collectors, his disciples really have lives that are kind of okay. But she doesn't, and his acceptance of her, I think,
It must have just been absolutely shocking to her.
really out of,
Yeah, and I think a privilege can do that to us, can't it? It can make us blind. Whereas she certainly had no privilege, nothing to kind of fall back on.
Like other townspeople, they were more privileged than she was, and they listened to her. Or they, which is quite amazing. But she had to have been really different when she came back, that she would even presume to tell anyone.
Yeah, if they'd shunned you, you might want to just say, well, I'm keeping this for myself. I'm not going to put this out there. Anybody else? Yes, Sarah.
I also like Samaritan woman. And what Kathy said really, I mean, she was probably, I don't know, I mean, I would imagine if I were in her shoes, I'd feel kind of tired of life after drudging myself out to this well in the middle of who who knows where, under the hot sun, by myself. I'd feel lonely. I'd probably be pondering, where did I go wrong? And here's this fellow here who is clearly not from around here. and instead of that cultural response of just immediately spitting with contempt, I would hope that Jesus used please. But maybe that's just me. I would feel confused, and as he went on, I would feel probably hopeful that maybe there's some chance I can, that things can be made right. You know, because if this person who's not even supposed to acknowledge my existence other than with disgust is talking to me and telling me these things and knows me and still is willing to talk to me, like knows what I've done without me telling him, then maybe there's a glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just me projecting my feelings onto her, whatever. I think that the world needs a little more hope.
Yeah.
And probably did back then too, and she probably wanted to share that. Much like we probably want to share that now.
Thank you.
Was Jesus, and the one thing that came to my mind was compassion, and I think the teaching. I mean, like when we're talking about what Tim said about teaching the disciples and teaching townspeople, but how he comes to the poor and the rejected. I mean, I don't see. I mean, he knows that this woman is not loved, not cared for, is like the spit of the earth, you know, kind of thing. And I'm wondering if Jesus' heart was just opened, like knowing that this woman open to love and compassion that we're called to, of the other.
I'm struck, and I hadn't thought of this before with this passage, but that in a way by saying, give me a drink, which strikes us as being a little abrupt, to ask someone to give to us, to show our need, can be very powerful as a way to open things up. And often we come from a place of, here, let me give you, let me give you, let me give you. And instead, Jesus is saying, I need this from you. Let's just, as we finish, I invite you to just close your eyes for a minute, and let's just consider what we want to take from this story into our daily lives. And I would invite you to bring, if you care, to a word or a phrase, something you want to carry from this into your life. Fully known.
Teacher.
Jesus comforts.
Power of one woman's voice.
brings a loving wife.